I don't keep the back of my house cluttered anymore. No benches, no shoe racks, no rugs meant to look welcoming. There's a clean, empty line from my bedroom to the exit. Nothing to trip over, nothing to slow me down. People say the place feels bare, unfinished. They've never had to calculate escape routes in half seconds, or learned how fast panic turns a familiar room into an obstacle course. This was January 2020. I was 34 and working the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., at a pharmacy. I rented a small cottage at the end of a dead-end road, the kind of place that disappears into darkness once the sun comes up. Because I worked nights, I slept lightly. I knew the house by sound alone. The furnace rattling awake, the pipes hissing, the sharp pop of hardwood contracting in sub-zero cold. Any noise out of place snapped me fully awake. He was a regular at the pharmacy. He always came in around 3 a.m., bought one or two small items and lingered. He asked questions that felt casual but weren't. Whether I lived alone, what time my shift ended, if I felt safe living somewhere so isolated. I told myself I was being paranoid. You learn to do that as a woman. You learn to smooth over instinct with politeness. Then one morning, driving home, I saw a dark sedan idling at the mouth of my street. When I turned, it turned. When I slowed, it slowed. By the time I reached my driveway, my hands were shaking. I should have called the police. I didn't. Friday morning, I was in bed by 8:30. At 1:14 p.m., I woke up. Not to a crash or a shout, but to a sound that didn't belong. Scraping, slow, deliberate metal dragging against wood. I sat up and reached for my phone. The sound changed instantly. One violent crack as the deadbolt tore through the wooden jamb. Boots hit the kitchen floor, heavy, close. I lunged for my bedroom door. The handle turned before I reached it. The door flew open as he hit it with his shoulder, slamming me backwards onto the floor. He was in the room immediately. He had a heavy canvas jacket, pry bar in his hand. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I tried to crawl toward the far side of the bed. He grabbed the back of my sweatshirt and yanked me toward him. I swung my right arm back and caught him in the throat with my elbow. When he recoiled, I turned and drove my thumb into his eye socket with everything I had. He screamed, a sharp, guttural sound, and staggered away, clutching his face. I ran. The hallway blurred, the kitchen was destroyed, the back door hanging open, the frame splintered outward like broken teeth. I bolted through it, socks sliding on the frozen porch steps, lungs burning as I ran toward the nearest house. Behind me, I heard him, boots pounding, fast and angry. I reached my neighbor's back door and slammed my hand against the glass, screaming for help, screaming for them to call the police. Lights snapped on inside. When I looked back, he had reached the edge of my porch. He saw the lights. He stopped. Then he turned, ran back through my house, and vanished towards wherever he'd left his car. The police caught him 20 minutes later, 2 miles away. He was sitting in his sedan trying to stop the blood pouring from his eye. In his trunk, they found zip ties, duct tape, and a notebook. Inside it were my shift changes, the times my lights went out, notes from the past week. He'd been parked half a mile away, walking through the woods to watch my house. He was 39. He had a history of prowling and burglary with sexual intent. He was convicted of home invasion and attempted kidnapping. He is serving 12 years. And my house is still empty at the back. Clear, quiet, ready. Because survival taught me exactly how much space fear needs to move. I didn't tell anybody for a long time, partly because nothing really happened. and partly because everything did. When people ask why I don't walk with headphones anymore, or why I still look over my shoulder on the streets, I just say I'm jumpy. That's easier than explaining the sound of my own breath in my ears as I ran, or the way a hand felt when it closed around my wrist and tried to decide what to do with me. It happened on a Tuesday, which I remember because Tuesdays were boring. I left work late, later than I meant to, and by the time I stepped out of the building, the sky had that deep, bruised color that pretended to be evening, but it is really night waiting to happen. I took my usual route home, the one I could walk without thinking. Down the long street with the closed storefronts, past the bus stop that always smelt faintly of stale beer, then through the residential block where the street lights hummed like tired insects. I noticed him almost immediately, though I couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the rhythm of the footsteps that didn't quite line up with mine. Maybe it was instinct finally doing its job after years of being ignored. I glanced at the dark window and saw a shape behind me, distorted by glass and reflection, moving when I moved. I told myself it was nothing. People walk the same way home all the time. Coincidences happen. Still, I slowed, pretending to check my phone. The footsteps slowed too. I sped up. So did they. That was when the quiet changed. The street had been empty in that ordinary way. The kind of empty that feels safe because it's familiar. But now it felt hollow, like a room where something has been removed. I could hear my own shoes too clearly. The soft scuff of rubber on concrete. The faint jingle of my keys in my bag. His footsteps stayed just far enough back that I couldn't hear his breathing, but just close enough that I knew he was there. I crossed the street without meaning to. He crossed too. My heart started doing that awful fluttering thing that makes your chest feel too small. I ran through options like a checklist. Turn around and confront him, duck into a store, call someone. There were no open stores. My phone was in my hand, but my fingers felt thick and clumsy. I didn't want to turn around. I then turned down the side street instead, the one with the row of parked cars and the broken street light that flickered on and off like it was thinking about it. The moment I did, I knew it was a mistake. The sound of traffic faded. The houses were dark and close together, their windows black and watching. The footsteps quickened. I started walking faster, then faster, until it tipped into a jog. My breath came sharp and loud. The air felt cold going in, burning coming out. I told myself I was overreacting, even as my body did the opposite, adrenaline pouring through me like a warning bell. "Hey," he said. It wasn't shouted. That was the worst part. It was casual, almost friendly, as if he were calling after someone he knew. I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I just walked, then ran, my bag bouncing painfully against my hip. His footsteps were closer now, no longer pretending to match mine. I could hear the scrape of his shoes, the wet sound of his breath. The street light flickered and went out, and in that brief darkness, he was suddenly there, a shadow that detached itself from the night. His hand grabbed my arm. The world narrowed to that point of contact, fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. I screamed, an ugly animal sound that didn't feel like it came from me, and twisted away. My bag slipped off my shoulder and fell between us. He stumbled when he stepped on it, and I yanked my arm free. "Don't," he said, sharper now, angry. He reached for me again. I don't remember deciding to fight, I just did. I swung my elbow back and felt it connect with something soft. He grunted. I kicked blindly, my foot slamming into his shin. Pain shot up my leg, but he staggered. I grabbed my jacket this time, fabric tearing under his grip. For a horrible second, we were chest to chest and I could smell him. Sweat, something sour and old. His face was close enough that I could see the whites of his eyes in the dark. "Stop," he said. There was something desperate in it, something pleading and wrong. I shoved him with everything I had. He fell against a parked car, metal ringing softly. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Somewhere, a dog started barking. I ran. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs felt like they were going to split. My legs shook so bad, I thought I might collapse. I ran past the end of the block, past the street light that actually worked, into a pool of yellow light that felt like salvation. I banged on the nearest door with the flat of my hands, sobbing and shouting words I don't remember. Someone opened it, a woman in a bathrobe, eyes wide, taking in my torn jacket, my shaking hands, my wild face. She pulled me inside without asking questions and locked the door behind me. The police came. They asked me to describe him, and I tried. Average height, dark clothes, a voice that sounded almost kind at first. They drove up and down the street with their lights off and on, then off again. They didn't find him. I walked home later with a friend. The streets suddenly full of shadows that all looked like him. Every sound made me flinch. My arm bloomed with bruises the next day. Yellow and purple fingerprints that felt unreal, like props from a movie I'd watched too closely. Nothing really happened, people say when I tell them now. You got away, you're fine. They're right, of course. I did get away. I'm here. But sometimes when I walk home and the light is just starting to fade, I hear footsteps that aren't mine, and I remember how easily a normal night became something else. I remember how close I came to being a story with a different ending, and how thin the line was between walking safely through the dark and being swallowed by it. I don't look at my doorbell camera anymore. I had it uninstalled and the wires capped off 6 months ago. I'd rather have the mystery of a knock at the door than the certainty of what I saw on that screen. I live in a high-rise now, on the 24th floor. I pay a premium for a doorman, just so I never have to be the first person to verify who is standing on the other side of the entrance. This happened 3 years ago. I was 29, working as a floor manager for a furniture wholesaler. We operated out of a massive, converted warehouse on the industrial edge of the city, 15,000 square feet of polished concrete and stage living environments. On this particular night, I was staying late to finish a quarterly inventory audit. My staff had clocked out at 6 p.m. By 10:30 p.m., the only lights left were the dim, recessed LEDs above the main walkways and the glow from my laptop. The heavy winter rain outside muffled the street noise, leaving the building tomb quiet. I was sitting in the back office, a glass box overlooking the warehouse floor. I reached for my coffee and realized I was out of cream. I stood up and walked toward the kitchenette located near the home office display area. As I walked, I noticed an office chair in the display had been moved. We were meticulous about the floor layout. Every chair always tucked in at a specific angle. This one was pulled out about 3 feet, positioned to face the glass wall of my office. I tucked it back in and continued to the kitchen. While I was pouring the cream, I heard a sharp, metallic clink. It was the sound of a set of keys being dropped onto a stone countertop. It had come from the kitchen and dining section, about 50 feet away. "Is someone there?" I called out. Silence. Just the rain hitting the corrugated metal roof. I walked toward the dining section to investigate. The smell hit me immediately. The sharp, heavy scent of unwashed skin, damp wool, and stale tobacco. It was thick in the stagnant air of the showroom. I rounded a corner near a large wardrobe and saw a man. He was middle-aged, wearing a dark utility jacket that was much too big for him. He was standing by the dining table, looking down at a set of display silverware. He picked up a steak knife and ran his thumb slowly along the edge of the blade. Then, he turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot. "I live here," he said. His voice was raspy, barely a whisper. "I've been here for a while." I started backing away toward the service corridor. "The store is closed," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm going to my office to call the police. You need to leave right now." He started walking toward me. He had a hurried, heavy-footed stride, his boots thudding loudly on the concrete. He was closing the gap fast. I broke into a run. I sprinted through the bedroom section, weaving through the maze of bed frames and partitions. I could hear him behind me, his breathing heavy and labored. He tripped over the edge of a rug, and I heard a heavy thud, followed by a string of muffled curses. I headed for the loading dock. I scrambled up the stairs to the shipping office, slammed the heavy wooden door, and shoved a metal filing cabinet in front of it. Seconds later, the door handle turned. Then came the pounding, steady rhythmic thumps of his fist against the wood. "I just want to sit on the sofa," he said through the door. His voice was calm now. "It's cold outside. Why can't I just stay in the room?" I stayed on the phone with the 911 dispatcher for 20 minutes, listening to him talk to himself on the other side of the wood. He began describing the furniture in detail, whispering about which chairs were the most comfortable and how he liked the blue room the best. When the police arrived and breached the building, they found the loading dock door propped open with a brick. The man was gone. They did a full sweep of the facility. In the back of the warehouse, tucked between two oversized crates in the overflow storage area, they found his hiding spot. He had laid out a stolen moving blanket on the floor. Scattered around it were empty water bottles, a pile of fast food wrappers, and a stack of my old inventory clipboards. On the back of those clipboards, he had used my pens to track my movements. He had written down the exact times I arrived each morning, the length of my lunch breaks, and how many hours I slept alone in the office at night. He had been living less than 50 feet from my desk for at least a week. They never caught him. The police believed he slipped in during a daytime freight delivery and stayed hidden. I move every year now. I check the spaces behind the doors, under the bed, and inside the closets every single night before I sleep. Because I know that a locked door doesn't mean anything if the person is already inside. This happened 5 years ago. I was 27 and I had just bought my first house. A small 2-bedroom bungalow on a quiet street lined with overgrown oaks. It was a fixer-upper tucked away in the neighborhood where the streetlights were spaced too far apart. I lived alone. Being a skeptic, I never worried about the noises of an old house. To me, a settling foundation was just physics, and a drafty window was just a DIY project for the weekend. I spent my evenings in the living room, usually with my headphones on, tucked into the corner of the sofa. It started on a rainy Thursday in November. I was in the kitchen, washing a few dishes before heading to bed. The kitchen window looked out over the narrow strip of a yard between my house and the neighbor's fence. As I reached for the towel, I saw the black door handle move. It wasn't a violent shake. It was a slow, deliberate turn, the way someone checks a door to see if the deadbolt is engaged. I stared at it, frozen. The handle turned to its limit, held there for 3 seconds, then slowly released back to the original position. I walked to the door and checked the lock. It was secure. I turned on the porch light and looked through the glass. The yard was empty. I convinced myself it was the wind, or perhaps a neighbor's kid playing a prank. I went to bed, but for the first time since moving in, I locked my bedroom door. The next night, the air in the house felt different. It was cold, but it was also heavy, carrying a faint, distinct smell, the scent of wet asphalt and old damp cardboard. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard a sound from the crawl space access in the hallway. It was a soft scratching, like something metal dragging across a wooden beam. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I opened the bedroom door and shined the beam down the hall. The crawl space cover was a square wooden panel in the ceiling. It was seated perfectly. I walked into the living room, my heart beginning to race. I noticed the coffee table. I had left my keys and a book on it before going to the bathroom. Now the book was open to a different page, and my keys have been moved 6 inches to the left. Someone had been in my room while I was down the hall. I turned toward the kitchen to grab my car keys and run, but a shadow moved in the corner of my eye. A man was standing in the pantry. He was wearing a dark, grease-stained hoodie and jeans that looked like they have been dragged through mud. He was thin and skeletal almost, and he was holding a screwdriver he had taken from my own toolbox in the basement. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was just standing there, watching me. "I like the way you decorated," he said. His voice was dry, hollow, raspy, like sandpaper on glass. "The blue looks better than the white." I didn't answer. I backed toward the front door, but he stepped out of the pantry, cutting off my path. He moved with a strange, lurching gait, his left leg dragging slightly behind him. He began to whistle a low, tuneless melody that I had recognized as the song I had been humming while I painted the walls the week before. He lunged. I swung my heavy flashlight at his head, but he ducked, the screwdriver catching the sleeve of my sweater and tearing the fabric. I pushed past him, shoving a kitchen chair into his path. He stumbled, the chair clattering across the hardwood. I didn't head for the front door this time. I ran into the bathroom and slammed the door, turning the lock just as his shoulder hit the wood. The pounding started. It was steady. "You left the window in the basement unlocked on Tuesday," he whispered through the door. "I've been in the guest room closet since then. You walk right past me every morning." I sat on the floor, my back against the tub, clutching my phone as I spoke to the 911 operator. I could hear him leaning against the door, his heavy, wet breathing the only sound in the house. The police arrived in 6 minutes. They found the back door standing wide open, but the man was gone. They did a sweep of the house and found his hiding spot in the guest room closet. He had moved a small pile of my spare blankets into the corner. Scattered on the floor were several empty granola bar wrappers from my pantry and a collection of my Polaroids he had taken from my drawer. On the back of the photos, he had used a marker to circle my face in every single one. The most unsettling discovery was in the basement. He had unscrewed the light bulbs just enough so they wouldn't turn on, and he had set up a chair directly beneath the floor joist of my bedroom. He had been sitting there in the dark listening to me sleep for 4 nights. They never caught him. They found footprints leading into the woods behind the house, but the rain had washed away most of the trail. I sold the house 2 weeks later at a loss. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to be somewhere where the walls were thick and the closets were empty. But sometimes when I'm sitting in my new apartment, I hear a floorboard creak in the hallway. And every morning when I wake up, the first thing I do is check the keys on my nightstand to see if they moved an inch to the left.